everybody. This is Sarah Whitaker.
And Salty Dulty.
Yes, and we're here with the podcast Working the World. And this is a wrestling podcast, only instead of talking about current politics or what the shows might have, we're actually talking about what wrestling is doing as a whole, like how it actually works, like the nuts and bolts of it.
Basically, an internal working expose without trying to bury the business from two workers, past and one present.
Well, especially since back in the old days, talking about this stuff was really taboo and very, very locked up. But, I mean, now that everybody knows that the inner workings going on are a work, then we could talk about it more openly and hopefully improve the business by talking about it openly.
Especially because a lot of the workers currently in the industry today are having, like, from that era, a little bit of the same thing going on, except they're not as, what's the word I'm looking for, in-depth about it. And it's like, we want to kind of be more like the Stevie Richards show on YouTube. Actually tell you, it's like, hey, bit by bit, bolt by bolt, nut by nut, this is basically how this is and the way it should be, in our opinion. So
Right. And I have a potpourri of experience in professional wrestling. I had my first run between 2002 and 2005. Wrestled 7 matches in my life, but I've been a manager, I've been a promoter, I've been a photographer, I've done a lot of media. I've been a referee. God, now that I think about it, I've done a lot of stuff that I haven't even thought about. But
yeah, that's kind of how it is when you look back after. It's like, you know, when I first started, which is going on 11 years now. I had my first training camp in March of 2013, and I had my first match in December in that year, and then I really started picking up and started taking bookings around October of 14, somewhere in there. Between that little time span between the first match and when I started working regularly, I did a lot of the same stuff you did. I refereed, I did soundboard, I did recording for the shows, I did all kinds of stuff like that, tearing down the ring, which every young boy should be doing, no matter how big their ego is or how long of a road trip that they have to go. My opinion is like, you need to tear down that damn ring. Come on.
yeah, and
show the venue respect, and show the boys some respect.
Both of us have had experience in the wrestling industry with different facets and whatnot, and I mean, especially we're married, of course, but
I think everybody knows that.
I think everybody knows that by now, but
this is my wife, and she's a bear.
Roar. And I mean, our perspectives really balance each other out fairly well, and I think we can give an educated perspective to those that may not know wrestling very well.
I mean, I am about as old school as you can get. I mean, I still have, part of me is still kind of like punching myself in the head. It's like, damn it, why are you doing this? Like, well, everybody else in the world that came before you has done this at one point or another. So it's like, well, if I'm going to follow in their footsteps, why not go ahead and show, like, behind the scenes, like they do that on, DVD experts on movies, and they do that, on, like, Tough Enough and shows like that. And it's like, damn it, that's just how things are, and, you got to roll with the punches.
Right. So let's start, because I know a lot of people who haven't been listening to wrestling much are going to be listening to this podcast. So I would like to introduce a jargon word of the week for those that may not know what some of the words that we use, because we were talking about the word working and workers. So let's talk about what does it mean to be a worker and work stuff. So working is making somebody privy to the act that you're doing. I've heard some people use it as a term for lying.
Oh yeah, it's like, I was just working. Come on.
Yeah. Or so I mean, it's like, what does it mean to work a punch?
Basically, make everybody around you believe that it's real, but in actuality, not actually kill the guy that's receiving it.
Right. So I mean, then we have jargon like stiff and snug, and but
Which basically is the same thing, just different terminologies.
it's
Snug,
how hard you're working.
yeah, exactly, or how little you're actually working.
Mm.
So snug, you can hit somebody in a very hard, believable manner, but actually protect them at the same time. Stiff tends to hurt a little bit more than snug. Even though you might hit them the same way, it's like, oh, that was stiff. It's like, oh, that was snug. But I'm okay.
Now, is it true that I want to say this right? Every professional wrestler is a worker, but not every worker is a professional wrestler.
Correct.
All right.
To an extent, yeah.
Could you elaborate on that for me?
Well, basically, a professional wrestler is somebody that goes out there, takes somebody down, works a headlock, shoot them off, tackle, drop down. A worker is somebody that can make the people want to pay to see that. Anybody can go out there and get trained to be a professional wrestler. But they used to say back in the olden days, a good worker is somebody that actually has somebody go and pay to see them and want to, see them actually open up their wallet. Hey, I want to see Dusty Rhodes wrestle, even though all he does is elbow drops and, his little shuffle, but at the same time, I want to see it. And it's like, it might not even be, the most technical match in the world, but people still want to see it. Why? Because it makes them feel good, they get entertained, and they go home feeling happy, and they want to come back and see it again. You can do that being a professional wrestler, but you could go out there not knowing a single hold or, knowing how to take a single bump, and yet at the same time put on an entertaining match that people want to see. But that training definitely sure helps.
Well, I mean, especially like in the olden days when you have people like Hogan and Ultimate Warrior who didn't have a very glorified moveset. I mean, they didn't do...
Their stuff did not look to basically the standard of somebody like Bret Hart or somebody like, Ricky Morton or Ric Flair, somebody like that, but people still paid to see them because they were in style. And Vince McMahon was smart enough, rode on that train, and, put them in the ring with good workers who could actually cover the up, but they were actually paying to see Warrior and those guys, but they were being carried through, because Warrior was still really green at the time, being carried through a match that wouldn't be as good otherwise if they hadn't have had, somebody that knew all the tricks of the trade be able to, polish them up and make them look as good as they did. So
who is somebody who's a good worker in today's industry?
Well, there's a lot of them. It's like, obviously Gunther, I think, is a really good worker. I think MJF's a really good worker. I think Kenny Omega is a really good worker. I hope Jim Cornette hears that, and I hope I piss him off by saying that. Hey, Kenny Omega can make me suspend my disbelief sometimes, so I'll give him that. I mean, I haven't seen a match of his on that's bullshit, except for maybe the blow-up doll match or the match with the 9-year-old girl, but nobody was meant to take those matches seriously, and that was kind of like, basically, the dark web as opposed to a World Wide Web. That kind of makes sense. That's what DT Pro was. And Cornette, being the hyper-fixated person he is on making wrestling believable in his generation, well, here's one thing I gotta say. Even though some of the stuff that we do in wrestling, we cannot do in a real bar fight, people still want to suspend their disbelief and go and want to believe that this could be in the realm of possibility in a real fight in this context, and they accept it. It's like, oh, it's pro wrestling.
Well, it's pro wrestling, and that's the next topic that we're going to be covering here shortly, because it's like, especially with professional wrestling, you know that it's predetermined.
Absolutely.
And one of the things that, for those of you who don't know who Vince Russo is, he was a very...
I think a lot of people nowadays know who Vince Russo is, especially because he's making another internet presence again.
He's starting to make another internet presence again, especially with his comments towards the big leagues these days, and they're saying it's like the professional wrestling industry is being run by wrestlers instead of writers, and that's why everything stinks. And it's like, it made me think really hard because in the event that we've been working, because we used to be promoters ourselves.
Yep.
And it's like, I tried writing for an indie promotion and it didn't work because there's a difference between writing and booking.
Absolutely.
And I didn't know the difference between that until he said that. And it took me a lot of time and research in order to get to that point. So I'd like to go over that with you if you don't mind.
Oh, let's go ahead and do it.
Awesome sauce. So what is a booker to you?
Well, a booker to me is somebody who has total control over the entire show, calls the finish of every single match, and actually comes up with the creativity, like for interviews and, you know, promos and things leading up for that angle between the two wrestlers and everybody else on the card. Well, a writer basically works underneath in modern context, is an assistant booker throwing that booker ideas of how we can actually get from A to B on here. It's like, hey, let's go ahead and have wrestler A run over wrestler B with his car out in the parking lot and have him come back the next week and hit him with a crowbar. That's what writer is. But a booker has total control over the show, and it's like, you can tell that writer, I don't think that. Tell you what, let's go ahead and have wrestler A go and try to run him over, and wrestler B, the next time we have the show, he actually comes out and busts out the window of his brand new car, and they want to fight over that.
So a booker is more along the lines of the inner workings of the show and the matches, while a writer films extra fluff, if you would, for the
he gives a booker a reason or ideas to be able to make the card come together, or at least attempts to. But back in the olden days, we didn't have writers. You had one booker and maybe an assistant booker under him to go back and forth with ideas until the booking committee with WCW, where he had like 5, 6, 7 guys. Those guys were a little bit more like writers, but they were like ex-professional wrestlers, so they understood what ideas could possibly work under the context of professional wrestling, and then shoot it to the head booker, be it Ric Flair or be it Eddie Gilbert, whoever it was on that booking committee, and then they'd have to go to Jim Herd, and Jim Herd would say, it's like, no, we need ding-dongs from Belleville, Illinois. Oh, yeah, that'll sell.
Well, especially with Vince Russo's comments, I mean, what makes him say that they need writers?
Oh, simple. So he can work himself into getting a job.
Well, of course that he can get a job, but I mean, it's like, why were writers prolific to the Attitude Era?
Because they were coming out of the box ideas, because basically the Attitude Era, anything and everything that had not been done in wrestling before, they attempted, and they attempted it on live TV with the sexuality, the extreme blood and gore. Well, actually that had been done, but not to maybe that extent, because they got a lot of that from ECW, and like Paul Heyman even says that himself. It's like, yeah, they took my formula and made billions of dollars with it, and they took my TV show and made billions of dollars with it when they went to TNN, I think 2000. But the whole thing of it is that writers can be useful, but I think wrestlers need to be run by, or wrestling promotions need to be run by wrestling people that actually understand the inner workings of it, to be able to shoot down ideas from writers that might not be good, like ding-dongs or, the hunchbacks or crap like that. Or especially beaver cleavage.
Well, especially in the independent circuit where you don't have as many people, you don't have a lot of cooks in the kitchen anyway. Mm-hmm. Sometimes you do, because it's like when I was first promoter for Wham, we had 5 people at the round table trying to...
And they were all owners, too.
And they were all owners at the same time.
Including your mother.
Including my mother, yes. I'm a second-generation promoter. But
in the same 2 companies.
I mean, the only time that writing really helped instead of booking is because we started 1 month before COVID hit, and we needed something on the internet to keep the story moving while we figure out how we're going to put on another show.
Yeah, extreme vignettes like we did.
Extreme vignettes. And there's nothing wrong with that. And but I mean, sometimes people don't understand, like, because here's the thing, there's a certain psychology to being a booker as opposed to a writer, because you have to know how a show is set up in order to, like, for instance, you have to have something really action packed but low general for the first match and stuff like that, and then
but
you slow
also
down.
You can't burn yourself out even on the main event, because you have to have highs, mediums, and lows on a wrestling show as well as a promotion throughout the year on its shows, because nothing stands out if that's the case. Because, like, if you can, we use the term hot shotting, just doing everything we can for shock value to draw people in. Well, that's what they did in excess in the Attitude Era, and that's why business hasn't, come back until, like, now with the resurgence of wrestling between, like AEW and WWE and NXT. It took a long time for the business to kind of get back to that point. Now wrestling is about as popular as it's ever been.
It's been as popular as ever been. I mean, especially since the wrestlers have started to take over with with Vince stepping down as.
Being able to give more creative freedom, because back in the day, all these wrestlers, when they had their own gimmicks or their own style, their own persona, they didn't have somebody in the ear tell them, here's what you're going to do, blah, 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 A to Z. Well, that might not click with that wrestler, and he's got to learn how to get over on his own somewhat. Like, there are wrestlers that can go and do that, being plugged into a character like Undertaker was one. But it fit his personality perfectly, and it was something that nobody had seen before, so it worked.
Well, and it's important for a booker and the wrestlers to have that communication as well, instead of, especially with some wrestlers being prima donnas, even in the indie circuit. But I mean, it's like, some wrestlers can be prima donnas, but other wrestlers, the communication between knowing what to do with their match and how, because it's like, in the end, it's the wrestlers that write the match.
To an extent, because in WWE, and they've had this for forever in the wrestling business, not a lot of indie companies have this, but they actually have what's called agents. But now in, like, WWE contacts, they're called producers. Basically, they're being told by the promoter or the head booker, like, hey, here's what I want for the finish in the match. Work with the wrestlers on this to see what we can put together and make it make sense and get their input as well. Instead of, as opposed to, like, a dictator coming in, it's like, you're going to do this, 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 and this, and you're going to do it, and you're going to like it, and if you don't like it, get the hell out.
Yeah, because the booker will have the finish, but, usually everything is called in the match by the wrestlers.
Usually, yeah.
Yeah. So, having the communication is important between the wrestler and the booker, and it's also important for, where was I going with this?
Communication's vital. Instead of just telling everybody what to do, get their input as well. See because it might not work creatively with the wrestler and their character, and it's like, okay, well, what would you suggest then? In the instead of just saying, it's like, and who knows, what the people in the match are actually doing, because they're the ones that have to go out there and risk their lives for it. It's like they might actually have an idea that might be, that you might like better than what you had already. So you never know.
Well, especially with the jump between, because for those of you who don't know wrestling, there's a huge chasm between independent wrestling and the big leagues.
Oh, you think?
Well, yes, but
there was a reason why for a little bit Vince did not want to hire indie wrestlers in WWE. He wanted to hire only ex-professional athletes. There was a time where he was doing that.
Right. And with the chasm between independent wrestling and, like, the big leagues, what room is there for writers in the independent circuit in that respect? Because a lot of bookers do this. Because, like I said, there's not a lot of hands in the kitchen sometimes, and so the booker is also the writer. And so, even though they put out stuff on the internet, they don't have long-term storytelling because most of their audience is in the crowd.
Yep. Well, the reason that a lot of that happens or doesn't happen on the indies, I should say, is because indie wrestling fans are passionate about what is only happening on the in-ring product. They don't care as much about the angles, in my experience, as they do what they want to see. They want to see, like a car crash match, get in there, get out, make them leave happy. I mean, like if you have a promotion like that has like Patreon, television, public access, whatever, then there's definitely more use for it. But, not to say that angles don't work in indie wrestling, which by God they certainly do. But it's like their attention span from show to show, well, they only have a show like once every month, maybe once every 2 weeks at the most, a lot of these independent shows. So you got to kind of compact everything into one show and send them home happy, or at least give them enough to where they can remember for the next show when you come back. Because of the spacing between the shows, I think that's the biggest difference. Like WWE, AEW, weekly TV, multiple TV shows. Independents running once, twice a month, depending on how big they are, how much money they have in the bank, and then you got to do something and be able to make them remember it. So.
And that's the key thing, is having the fans remember, like, who's who. I mean, because it's like, especially when you're running multiple towns, like, because like a lot of indie wrestlers will hop between different towns, and they could be a face in one area, and they could be a heel in another area.
Or even in the same town for another company if they're allowed to work there, depending on if there's a promotional war between two promotions, or if there's, or if it's like the next town over, you have them be babyface in one town, heel in the next, babyface in another. So it's, kind of like a multiverse, to say the least.
Which is why, I mean, writing doesn't work as well as booking in the independent circuit. So, I mean...
Not to say that writing and creative ideas from somebody that's not an experienced wrestler isn't useless. It's just that it's a little bit less applicable on the indies. That make sense?
Right. And, I mean, especially with comments that Russo had been making in professional wrestling in
I could make
general.
a lot of comments about him.
Well, I mean, everybody can. But, I mean...
Well, this is a free country until they turn it communist.
Well, let's try to keep politics off of the podcast, my dear.
I'm just going theoretical. I mean, like, I know that there's certain wrestlers and certainly ex-wrestling promoters and ex-wrestling personalities that they think their opinion's the only one that matters. So I'll leave it at that.
Well, including Vince Russo.
Yep.
But
that's why I was partially making a reference to that and his eternal enemy. Woo.
Well, how many eternal enemies does Vince Russo have? Because, I mean, he's like... he's made...
Cornette. And Leilani Kai.
Oh, okay. Leilani Kai, I haven't heard that one.
Yeah, oh, God. She went on, one of the shoot video series and did, like, a 20-minute rant about how Vince Russo screwed her over when she came to WCW. Actually, give an update on Leilani. She just had a hip replacement surgery and is reported doing well, so I'm happy to hear that. You used to have Leilani on your Facebook, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
On your old Facebook,
Yep.
Yeah, I've never heard anybody say anything bad about her, so...
Well, let's see. We're going on 20 minutes, over 20 minutes.
Yeah, if Jason Strife were here, he'd be like, "Go home."
God bless Jason Strife. Let's talk about Jason for a few more minutes.
Yep.
Because it's like, okay, for those of you who don't know the independent scene, there was this wrestler called Jason Strife. He was a promoter of Magnum, and he also wrestled under the hood of Yellow Dog.
As well as his real name everywhere, yeah.
Yeah.
Or, working name. His real name was Nate Blodgett.
Yeah, his real name is Nate Blodgett. He was on WWE several times.
And AEW as well.
And AEW Dark. And he tragically died at 37.
Yeah. Complications from common variable immunodeficiency, CVID.
Yeah, and he was a blessing to everybody, and
Basically, Jason Strife was one of the best minds locally we ever had here in the Midwest. And he actually got to make it somewhat to the big time, too, as well as make his company a, pretty big deal, especially around here, because, arguably, even though it's being run by new people now, he laid a really good foundation. He got the wrestling business from an independent mindset, and Strife also helped train me a little bit, as well as he actually got to train with you when you first started.
When I first started,
Yep.
yeah. This is just to let you know that professional wrestling is in the local area of the Omaha
Metropolitan area.
Thank you. And it's something that I'm very passionate about. I haven't,
Me too.
Because life has been kicking me in both shins. I haven't been paying as much attention to it as I should.
All I gotta say is that I'm glad that I got a third testicle because I've been kicked in 2 of them.
Okay. But
there's a reason they call me Iron Balls Dalty sometimes.
At the same time, it's here, and I mean stuff.
There's multiple promotions around here. Magnum is still going. We have PWP at the waiting room. We have MWA that runs back and forth all over the place, but they're mostly out of Lincoln. And of course, we had our own promotion. We might run again someday. We might not, just depending on how the chips line up. Liberty Wrestling Entertainment.
And didn't NLW run in Fremont?
Yes, they are running Fremont as well as South Sioux City, Nebraska, so they're kind of expanding a little bit too. And I've got my eye on coming back there. I'm a former tag team champion.
So,
yeah.
Well, okay. I think I'm going to be calling it a day for you. How's that sound?
So, all right. So, in other words, go home.
Go home. Okay, that should be our next jargon. Next jargon of the week for next time. So it's like go home. Well, let's just tell them what it means. It means end the match or
end the match and get the hell out of the ring. So you're going too long, or this match sucks.
Well, let's end every podcast with go home then.
Yeah. If the podcast is either going too long or it's just sucking ass.
Well, I think we did a decent job today. So.
Yeah, I think we did.
I think we did.
I've certainly given my hot takes. So.
Well, I mean, we need to be maybe a little bit less ADHD, but that's both of us. So.
Yeah, ADHD, autism, all that shit.
But hey, I mean, we're making a mark for ourselves. Mm-hmm. We're talking wrestling. We're getting this stuff done.
You gotta say Mizark instead of Mark. You'll insult them.
Well,
5-second joke. We'll get to that one later.
We'll talk about Carney another day.
Yep.
But anyway, this is Sarah Whitaker
and Salty Dalty,
and this is the end of Working the World. Like, subscribe, do whatever it takes in order to
give us money so we can keep this going.
Well, not necessarily money. I mean, at least give us your support.
Yeah. Well, we'll take the money. It's like Bobby Heenan said one time. It's like, oh, money can't buy happiness. Give me $50 and watch me smile.
Alrighty. That's it for Working the World, and have a nice day.
You too.